Hey, it's Greg here with MaritimeGardening.com. It's January 2024, and I'm starting to put some real thought into planning out my garden for the coming year. And for those that are new to my channel, every year I do a garden plan video, that sort of thing. And I usually end up having to break it up into multiple parts, so it's not super long. And so I'm going to kind of reorganize the way I do this, but to put it simply, this first part is more like a garden in review. I'm going to review what I planned for my 2023 garden and what actually happened, because that always informs what you're going to do for the next year. Not just in terms of your crop rotations, but also just things that didn't work, things that failed, why you think they failed, and what you're going to do about it the next year. So I do this in Microsoft Excel. It's not a garden planning software, but you can paste a picture into Excel, and you can stick labels on things, right? So all I do is I get up somewhere high. If you didn't have, I have a hill at the bottom of your screen is a hill, so I can get up above the garden and sort of get an somewhat aerial view. Where I was standing when I took this picture, I might have been 15 feet higher than the garden. Was that 5 meters, give or take? I guess if you didn't have that facility, you could get up on a stepladder or something like that, I suppose, or on the on a deck or on the roof of a house or whatever, or use some one of these fancy flying machines the kids are all playing with these days. Anyway, every year, ever since well, not since I started gardening, but I've always sort of taken a picture and labeled the picture. I started doing this a number of years ago, just short of 10 years ago. And it's neat to have a record of what you plan and what happens. So every year I have a plan and then the actual garden, like what you planned, right? The plan you have in the winter, and then what you actually did at the end of the year. What you planned and what you did. And always at the end, at the garden part, I usually put some notes at the bottom, like things that didn't work and what I think I need to do next year. Because you always forget these things later on in the season, right? And so this year is no different. It's for 2023. I had a plan, and that's what I'm going to talk about. The plan for 2023 and what actually happened, what didn't work, and why I think it didn't work, that sort of thing. So let's get into it. So maybe it's not obvious from my videos because I usually don't. I mean, at the beginning of my garden tour videos, I usually do an overhead aerial type view of the whole garden, and then for the garden tour, I'm actually in the garden walking around. So it can be difficult to get a sense of the layout of the garden. But the garden is shaped like an L, right? Like in the bottom left-hand corner of this photograph is, well, that's my little new pond here, but it's the base of a hill, and the garden's sort of wrapped around the hill. So it's got that sort of a very vaguely L shape, or it's maybe, I guess to use a better term, it's shaped like a kidney bean, maybe. It's a kidney shape, a sort of round, curved round thing. Okay, and in this direction over here, where the trees are, that is south, right? So I got a slope facing south, and the garden's sort of wrapped around that little hill. Right here we are facing east from the top of the hill, and here we are facing south from the top of the hill. Not the top of the hill, but partway up the hill. All right, so normally I have a plan like this. This sounds like, if you knew me, if you walked around my house, if you looked in the office I'm sitting in right now, this plan looks much more organized than I really am as a person. I'm not, I'm as organized as I need to be for whatever I'm doing. So, I have a professional job, I work in an office, relatively well organized there because I have to be. But if you looked at my desk here at home, there's knickknacks all over the place and little, pocket knives and things like that. It's just like a kind of hodgepodge, a mess. There's a degree of organization to it, but I'm not a highly organized, scheduled person. But, I know that for some things it's just better to be organized. So I defer to that when I have to. Okay, and I find for gardening, it's actually easier to be a laid-back, relaxed gardener if you have everything planned out. All I do in the spring is I usually print off an image of my plan, or I'll just get a pen and paper and do a very quick drawing. And any given evening in April, May, right? June, that's when I'm planting things. I go out to the garden after work with maybe 3 or 4 packs of seeds and my drawing of where things should be. And I just get to work putting things where they're supposed to go. And I mean, for those of you that don't do this sort of thing, and the reason I do that is because I used to just go to the garden and stare and stare and stare and stare and try to, rethink and double think and overthink where everything should go. Uh, I think January is a good time of year. Right? You take a few notes at the end of the year, what went wrong, and then in January, February, right, when you've got time, you give a lot of thought to where everything should go when you're thinking at your best, right? And you're reviewing all the failures of the previous year and the successes. So that way in April, May, June, when you're planting, you don't have to do so much thinking. You can do a lot more doing, right? So your time's better spent, right? You don't have to, it's actually very relaxing. I just go outside with a handful of things to do, and I do them really, really well. And then I can go back inside and take a shower and enjoy the rest of my evening. Okay, so strangely enough, I think 2023 was the first year ever that I made a plan for my garden and I really didn't deviate from it at all. Everything went where I thought it should go for the most part. Okay, it's very little changes. So I'm not going to go into where I planned for everything to go because everything went where I planned it to go. I think it's more interesting to talk about what went wrong or what things didn't do as well as I'd hoped and why and what I'm going to do about it. Okay, so here is a picture from, I think, June of 2023. So, I mean, this plan picture would have been taken, I guess, in the fall, probably September, maybe even January. Everything looks dead. Not September. I mean, there's nothing happening here. So I don't know when I took this. I don't know when I took this picture, but I can see that there's fall rye growing here. So this is probably December or January. There's no snow on the ground, but I'm finding in more recent years there's less snow around here in January than it used to be. I'm looking out the window right now, and my lawn is green, and there's no snow in sight. We've had lots of snow. In fact, it was snowing yesterday. In fact, yesterday there was something like a blizzard, but it's all gone now. And it seems like we're getting these milder and milder and milder winters, and I don't really know what that means for the growing season. But certainly, I think we're going to have fewer late starts to the growing season if this keeps up. Because right now it looks like late March outside. It looks and feels like late March. It's only, I think it's 2 degrees above zero in the middle of January. This should be freezing. I'm used to it being freezing this time of year, right? And it's just white and everything's frozen. So this is, it's a bit unnerving. But anyway, we persevere. So, 2023 garden, everything went where I'd planned it to go. But you see the way I've labeled this. Red means, either didn't do it or complete fail. And this orange-ish, my wife says I'm colorblind, so when I say orange, I mean like orange. When I say yellow, I mean like yellow. I'm not that colorblind. I can't seem to pick up colors. I can't seem to tell navy from black anymore. So I don't know what's going on there. Anyway, this sort of orange color, it looks like almost like caution yellow. This means that the thing I planted grew, but it didn't grow as well as I would have liked. Okay, so yeah, I changed the configuration of my garden last year, and I got these beds way down in the corner here, right against. I find everything. Remember, this direction here is south, right? So the sun the sun is always angled off to the south a little bit in this part of the hemisphere, which means all these trees. So the sun's coming from that direction, which means all these trees create a kind of shade all along this perimeter. Everything along the perimeter, any bed along the perimeter, things just don't grow well the closer they get to the fence. I mean, this rhubarb in the corner did well, but rhubarb does a lot of its growing in April and May before all this foliage appears, right? And before all the weeds and bushes and all that scrub and stuff that grows outside the perimeter of the garden, before that stuff is large enough to cast shade, the rhubarb, it's an early starter, so it gets a lot of growing on before that's the case. So rhubarb's a perfect thing to grow along a south side of a garden where there's things casting shade from the angle of the sun. But all these other things I'm trying to grow along the fence: potato, carrot, beet, spinach, right? These potatoes down here, I planted them very early, like beginning of their red Norland potato. I planted them very early in the season, like as early as they could go in. And the rule for potatoes that I always follow is as soon as you see yellow dandelions, you can put your potatoes in the ground under a mulch. Um, and red Norland I find are extremely cold resistant potato. So as soon as I see just a couple dandelions, I plant potatoes here so they can get some growing before all this foliage gets on, starts blocking the sun, right? Because it's coming from that angle. So these potatoes did fine, right? But everything else I grow here, right? A lot of the things really don't start to grow till like June or July. And by then, all these weeds and all this foliage is just casting so much shade that the closer the thing is to the fence, the less well it does. Right? So I wanted to grow carrots here, which I've grown previous years, but there's a lot of tinkering I have to do. And I wanted to grow beets here. They didn't grow so well. Spinach grew well because I planted that in April, right? I grew lettuce here. That grew well because I planted it in April, right? When there isn't a lot of foliage and the weeds aren't as high, so there wasn't as much shade, right? But as the summer went on, I was supposed to plant lettuce and then follow it with Romano beans. Plant lettuce in April sort of thing. And then maybe early July, still not too late to plant a bush bean. Plant a bush bean. I like the Romano beans. They're nice, big, fat, tasty beans. I was supposed to plant them in that bed. I just didn't get around to it. So basically, I planted lettuce here and ate it until it bolted, and then I just let the bed go totally wild. And it was just a weedy mess by the end of the season. Same thing with the spinach here. I planted spinach and just let the bed go crazy. The beets and the carrots, they just never did well. And I'm not exactly sure why, other than there's less than ideal conditions for growing here. I've grown them here in the past, and maybe I just blew it in some way. I can't, I just did not make it happen. So I'd grown kale in a bed over here, and of course I had way too many kale over here. So when I thinned them out, I just plopped them into these beds, and they did really, really well. A lot of kale growing over here. In fact, the kale that I grew over here grew better than it grew over here, implying that maybe there's better soil, right? And the kale I moved over would have been over a foot high when I moved it, right? So they're like reasonably large enough kale, mature plants, right? As opposed to when I was trying to get these growing here, I was trying to get seedlings going, and they just never seemed to get going. One of the things I did as an experiment was I tried mulching with wood chips here, which I've done before, but that's right, now I'm recalling. So what I did was in between the rows, I put mounds of wood chips to suppress weeds. And then what would happen every single day was that birds would get into the garden. Lots of people think birds are after everything, but birds would get in the garden and move around the wood chips to find worms and stuff, right? They're looking for this time of year in spring when you're trying to get your carrots and beets growing. Birds are trying to feed their babies, and they want meat, protein, insects. So it's not that they were after my carrots or messing really with any intention to get to my carrots. They were messing around with the wood chips to get at what was underneath the wood chips. And in doing that, they threw wood chips over the tiny, tiny seedlings. I'm talking like 1-inch high plants. And that's just enough to mess them up and, compromise the development of the plant at that early stage of its development. So what I should have done was pulled off all the wood chips and, amended the soil a little bit and replanted and done all that sort of stuff. But for whatever reason, I was busy. So I just let it go, I just let it be a mess. And then at some point in July, I just moved some excess kale into those beds and got more kale. Okay, so it was fine. But, really I wanted more carrots and I wanted more beets. I ended up having a lot of kale last year, more kale than I ever needed. Anyway, I think one thing I'm going to do for these beds, because these beds are 4 by 6 in dimension. The 2 feet of the bed that's against the fence, nothing grows there. It's just, or things grow there, they grow poorly because there's always this stuff all along the edge. And some people have told me, why don't you just cut down everything outside the perimeter of your garden and mulch it with wood chips? That sounds good in principle. If you had any idea of the work that would be involved in doing that, you wouldn't suggest it. Just straight up, that's what I'd say. I mean, I could go out there and, hack it all down with a scythe or some sort of super weed whacker or something like that. But I mean, this is what would you call it? 50. I got about 150 feet of perimeter, and yeah, that's just so much more work, right? So it's just easier not to plant so close to the fence. So what I want to do with all of these beds is actually change their orientation so that instead of them being, let me just make a little shape here you can see. So right now they're oriented right this way against the fence. I'm going to change, whoops. I'm going to change them so that they're oriented. So I'm actually going to have less beds, but they're going to be kind of oriented that way, right, along the fence. So I'm going to actually have less cultivated space, and I'm going to have each of these beds alongside the fence and about 2 feet from the fence. And between the bed and the fence, I'm going to put an insane amount of material down, cardboard and mulch on top of it to suppress the weeds, right? So that way there won't be 3-foot high weeds, just brush growing right next to, some bed where I'm trying to grow stuff, right? Blocking the sun that's coming from that angle, blocking the early morning sun, right? What happens with all these beds is about 1/3 of the bed doesn't get sun from about sunrise until 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. So it's missing a number of hours of sun a day. The sun is your energy. The plant turns that sun energy into the things you want to eat. So you're just getting less plant. So, I mean, one of the realizations I'm coming to, and this is, I think, a natural evolution for a gardener, is you first start off trying to just plant everything everywhere no matter what. Just grow, use as much space as you can. And then, I mean, maybe this is because I'm getting older and I have less energy, but I don't have a lot of interest in planting anything anywhere that it's not going to grow well. I just don't have the time or the inclination. I also just can't stand having subpar results when I plant things. So, what's the point of trying to grow? And even I've noticed in these beds, what I tend to do is the last, 16 inches against the fence, I just throw mulch down anyway. I don't even use the full bed. So I'm not using that space anyway, really. And the things that are planted near the fence aren't growing well. So even when I'm using the space, it's not doing anything. So it just doesn't make any sense. It makes much more sense to reorient the beds, turn them 90 degrees, and put something down between the bed and the fence to suppress weeds, and just stop having, same thing over here, these Asian greens, there's big trees here, okay, and this direction over here is west. These beds are in the shade from about, 4 o'clock in the afternoon onwards. They don't get the shade, late afternoon shade. In late afternoon, a good deal of these beds are in shade. Everything, only half of the bed gets good sun. The half of the bed to the right does not get good sun. So I had like pak choi and bok choy and stuff like that. My family loves that sort of stuff growing here, but it was only like the front, this here, the left half of the beds that were producing. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to take these beds and change the orientation. I'm just going to have one big long bed, right, that goes like this, and then I'm going to have mulch around. And I'm just not going to waste time. I mean, I've got some perennials up against the fence here. You can see this is a fence, right? You can see the fence posts. But they just, I mean, they grow, but they grow poorly, right? So I'd rather just have nothing there and just mulch the hell out of it and keep the weeds from, and I'm always having to weed this corner because it's so shady that the only thing that grows well is these tenacious weeds that are sort of snaking their way in from the forest. So I'd rather just control it and have nothing there. And the few perennials I have growing here, I can put them in other places in my garden where they'll be happier, they'll grow better. Like I've got a nice little, this little green blob down here is, I think it's savory, winter savory, I believe. It grows okay, but there's other places I can put it in my garden where, like around my pond, I've got a big pond in this corner of the garden here. I don't know if you can see it. I got a pond here, right? I could put some of these herbs on the edges of the pond. So yeah, I'm going to change. Instead of having two beds here, I'm going to have one bed. We're going to have less space, but I think it'll make more sense. Similarly, along the edge, the base of the hill here, you can see I've got a bed, right? So right around here where it says leeks, Brussels sprouts, and Swiss chard, that's the base of a hill. Okay, if you look at this from the other orientation, that's what it looks like with the hill on the left. Right, so I've got this nice big bed that's about 3 feet from front to back, and it's raised about 10 to 12 inches above grade at the base of this hill, and it's south facing, right? South is to the right, so it always gets really good sun, right? So last year I planted Swiss chard, Brussels sprouts, and leeks there. None of these things did really well. So I mean, we can never be exactly sure why a bed doesn't perform as well. I know in previous years this bed's performed better. I know that I mulched it with wood chips this year as opposed to leaves and grass clippings and straw and things like that I've used in previous years. Some people make the argument that wood chips can deplete the level of nitrogen in the soil, although others say it really only depletes the nitrogen in the surface of the soil. But of course, when you're trying to get seedlings growing, that is where they're trying to get their nitrogen from, right? The roots are not deep. So, I mean, one takeaway with using wood chips when you're trying to get seedlings going, don't put them down when you're trying to get seedlings growing would be my advice. Okay, for two reasons. Number one, they are going to draw some nitrogen from the actual top inch of the soil, right? The soil organisms need nitrogen to break down those wood chips, and that's where they're going to get it. And that's where your seedlings are putting their roots. So there's that. But I think even more importantly, you make these nice mounds of wood chips, and then you have these nice little rows in between them where you planted your seedlings. And then birds get in the garden and they mess it all up, looking for snails and worms and stuff like that. And all your little tiny seedlings get stepped on, and they get wood chips. I mean, I'll have these nice little mounds, and I'll come home from work and it'll all be flat, right? So it just so I don't know if it's the combination. And also, I mean, once the plants got established and once they were growing, I mean, I just had to fight with the birds and make everything work. They never grew well. They didn't grow as well in other places. And point in case, or case in point, when I took the Swiss chard that had been growing in that garden and moved it to this, so I had this here, it said garlic and chard. So I planted garlic in this bed the previous fall, and then they grew and I harvested them in August, early August. In early August, when I pulled the garlic out, I plucked up some of the Swiss chard that was growing here and I planted it in this bed. Okay. Within about a month, the garlic in this within about a month, the Swiss chard that had been moved to this bed was twice the height of the Swiss chard that had come from the base of the hill, right? So I mean, this bed is at grade, so there would have been more water. Conceivably, it's just better soil, right? It was never mulched with wood chips. I don't think this bed here gets any more or less sun than this bed because the sun's coming from that direction, right? That direction is south, so I don't think it's a sun thing, right? But certainly, the Swiss chard was not growing well in that bed. And neither did the Brussels sprouts, and neither did the leeks. Everything grew poorly and, achieved maybe like a third of the productivity and full size that it would have put on otherwise. So totally unsatisfied with that. So I'm not going to plant anything like that. I think for the coming year, what I have to do with that bed is I have to amend it with some manure, right? I have to think that it was not as high in nitrogen as it should have been. So I have to amend it with some manure or something, right? And I'm going to plant something that's not quite so demanding, like peas or maybe potatoes or something kind of. And it also could be acidic, could have become acidic over time. When I was digging out this pond, right, we dug this huge pond. I got a couple of young fellows down the street, sort of like, grade 12, early university types, that age. We dug a huge hole here, the size of a grave basically, and all that soil came out. And we just distributed it all over the place in the garden. And because I'd made this bed bigger and wider, we put a lot of that clay type whatever soil in this bed. It might have changed the acidity profile of the soil in the bed and messed it all up. I don't know. Um, so anyway, what I have to do is do something here, add some manure and plant something that's, maybe something that's relatively tolerant of acidic soils like potatoes, and just see how well they do. I mean, if you think you got a soil acidity problem, plant potatoes because they don't mind acidic soil. They're much more tolerant of acidity than a lot of other things. So that's what I think I'm going to do, plant potatoes. I'll just make that whole thing a big potato bed. I've grown potatoes there before and they've grown well. Right? I've grown Swiss chard there and I've grown parsnips there and carrots. All those things have grown well in the past. So something happened because Swiss chard used to grow well there and now it doesn't. So I'll grow potatoes. And it's always good to rotate things anyway, right? Also, this bed down here, this spot, I was thinking that I've got this empty space here. And I've got this tiny little bed here. This is tiny. It's like 2 feet wide by 6 feet long. I planted lettuce there last year. But what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to join. You see, this garden has a very unique shape. Let's just say it's shaped like something a lot of young fellows like to draw when they're in junior high. So I think I'm going to de-shape that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this sort of wider part of this long pointy shaped thing, and I'm going to join the lettuce garden with that wider part and make a bed, a big kind of rectangular bed there. This isn't coming off great here, but it'll be kind of like that, right? Well, it's not showing up properly. I'm not doing it justice. But basically, I'm going to make one bed out of these two. I'm going to break a little space here, and then I'm going to take this part here and make it longer, right? It'll be longer. I mean, I'm exaggerating here, but this part of the bed will be separate from the other part. So one bed here that's like a big rectangle, sort of almost like a square. One bed here that's like a square. And then I have another bed here that goes into this empty space that's like a rectangle, and a space in between them. And that way I can get the most use out of that space. So what's the point of having a big empty space here with nothing, right? It's pointless. It's good to have walking paths, but you don't need like, a soccer field in your walking paths, right? So that's another change I'm going to make. As early as I can, as soon as things thaw out. I mean, geez, it might even, by the looks of things today, I could probably do it today. I can't believe I'm even saying that in January. But certainly, the way things are looking, I can probably do a lot of this work in March this year if things stay the way they seem to be looking. Down here, I was supposed to plant basil with my tomatoes. I just never got around to it. It's not that it failed. I just never planted them, never got around to it, never bothered. So maybe next year. I mean, I love basil. I mean, just love. Well, there's a lot of herbs I like, and basil's one of them. So I have to do something productive to get basil happening next year. We got awesome. I mean, everything that's yellow, it worked out great. The broccolini, the kale, the potatoes and peas worked out great, right? Spinach and beans. The idea is you plant spinach on the outsides. I just wrote an article about this on my Substack page, maritimegardening.substack.com. Is it substack.maritimegardening.com? One or the other. I'll put a link up on the screen. Anyway, you plant spinach on the outer sides, lengthwise on the bed, early, right, in April, when you can't plant as much early for beans around here. It's too cold. And then later in the season, like in the beginning of June, you plant beans down the middle. Right, and by July the spinach will start to bolt and it'll be done, and you just mulch that over and you train your beans up a big trellis, right? So you grow spinach, then beans, right? Down here I had cucumbers down the middle, and at the same time I planted dill and parsley on either side of the cucumbers, and that worked out great too, right? So everything else worked out fine. This end of the garden, in terms of the plan, the previous year I had reorganized my garden. If you look at 2022, in the middle of the garden I had a big apple tree and a whole bunch of blueberry bushes, okay? And I took all that out. Where it says T, B, W squash and pepper, that was this little orchard. Because that used to be the left hand, there used to be a fence right behind that before I made my garden bigger, right? But having an orchard in the middle of your garden casts shade, right? Because remember, all the sun's coming from the right-hand side here. South is in that direction. So it just didn't make any sense to have those trees and all those high, like 3-4 foot high bushes and stuff like that there, right? So I plucked all that out. I moved the trees against the back, the north side of the garden, the very end, fence here on the north end. Right? I got trees going down here, and then in front of the trees, I got a row of blueberry bushes. Okay, so and then I've got some beds here for these things. That was the plan: onion, garlic, and strawberry. And that's what I planted, right? Onion, garlic, and strawberry. There was already strawberries there that had been moved the previous year. The long-term plan is to actually change this around a little bit. And so I've got all of the blueberries that I moved took up well. You can see this beautiful trellis along the end. That's where I've got my grapes. I had a grape plant over here previously, right? If you look at 2022 garden, huge pile of, it's hard to see from this picture, but there's a huge grape trellis along here, right? I plucked that up. There's only one plant, right? And I built this trellis, and it's going to grow over there. All right. But the plan is to change these beds. These beds are maybe 5 feet by 6. They're like squares. I'm going to make them, there's this big space between these beds and the row of blueberry bushes. So the plan is these beds are practically rotted out anyway. So when I pull them out, I'm going to replace them with beds that are more rectangular in shape. And instead of having 3 square beds, I'm going to have 4 or maybe even 5 if it fits, long rectangular beds that'll go very close to the edge of this. It's like a hedgerow, but it's all blueberry bushes. And I think it'll still get good sun because, again, the sun's coming from the right-hand side here, right? So these will be on the north, right? This hedgerow of blueberry bushes is to the north of these beds, so it'll work out fine. Now, another thing that didn't work out so well, this bed here, I planted winter squash, and this bed I planted Taunus beet. It's a type of beet. And lots of sun, really good sunny spot. I mean, these two spots are just all-day sun. Neither of these things grew well. And now both of these beds were the soil that I used to fill them. Remember, these were this orchard. Okay. So both of these beds, really, I had beds at grade and I replaced them with slightly raised bed. And the soil that I sourced out to make them happen was from the hole I dug in the ground here. Deep, deep hole, right? So a lot of it's just clay, and it's very likely that it was acidic. The beets were growing in a way that really, the foliage were purple as opposed to green, which can be a sign of soil that's too acidic. I mean, any sign can be a sign of many things, but I tend to defer to the most likely thing. Like a lot of gardeners, if you read a lot of people troubleshooting on Facebook, they jump to the most exotic explanation, right? And 9 times out of 10, if something isn't growing well, it's either not getting enough sun, not getting enough water, or the soil's too acidic. Or it's getting too much. It's either not getting enough sun, not getting enough water, getting too much water, or the soil's acidic. Like 9 times out of 10, or the soil's lacking in nitrogen. Like those are the explanations that explain most. It's usually not, oh, you need more magnesium, oh, you need, whatever, cadmium or whatever, like it's usually not some exotic, oh, you need to inoculate your soil and you need this. I mean, there's instances where those things might be the case, but these are very, very exotic solutions to what are usually very simple problems. Most likely because I dug soil out of a deep hole and it was all clay down there, and I threw it in here and planted something in it. Most likely the soil was acidic. Everything behaved that way. The squash were tiny and pathetic, and the beets were tiny and pathetic. There's a 4x8 bed here where I grew eggplant. I did not use soil from the hole in this bed, and the eggplant grew great. Best eggplant I ever grew. Right? So, right. Basically everything else had the soil it had, and it grew well. Right? All the zucchini here grew well. Carrots and cilantro grew really. I had huge carrots this year. If you saw that video I did back in October and November, I had huge carrots. 3-inch diameter, some of them. Strawberries grew well. Best peppers I ever grew in this bed. Right? I got potatoes along the fence. They grew well. Right? The only two beds where everything stank were these beds with the soil from the hole. So, I mean, it was a bit, I was tempting fate. And also growing something like squash, right? Which squash is a heavy feeder. It needs really good, rich soil with lots of nitrogen to grow well. And here I was using this crap soil, just being arrogant. And I didn't amend it with anything. I didn't use manure. I didn't just use anything, right? So I think at least one of these beds I'll plant potatoes in. Probably this one here, because I mean at least the squash grew and I got some squash. The beets were just pathetic. I mean they were the worst looking beets I've ever seen. So I have to think this is a really acidic bed. Since potatoes don't mind acidic soil at all, it makes sense to just grow potatoes here next year and not even worry about it. And whatever I'm going to grow here, which I'll cover in my next video, whatever I'm going to grow in this bed is 8 feet by 8 feet. I'm going to have to amend this soil with some manure to get the nitrogen levels up, and I might even have to add some lime to bring the acidity down if it's got an acidity problem. I meant to make a video about this, but I just didn't get around to it last year. I did a crude acidity test in this bed last year. All I did, I went out with a little jar, and I put a couple tablespoons of soil in the jar from this bed, and then I got a little bit of tap water from my house, and this is water that's I've got a reverse osmosis filtration system. We get our water from a well, so this is super filtered water. Okay, and so I put maybe 2 or 3 tablespoons of water in with the soil. Then I put a teaspoon of baking soda in, and the crude test is if the baking soda fizzes, you've got acidic soil. It doesn't tell you how acidic it is, but it's certainly not neutral if the baking soda fizzes. And it did. It fizzed just like I'd put vinegar. It reacted the way you would, not as strongly, but had that reaction of when you get a combination of vinegar and water and you put baking soda, it fizzes up. It fizzed like that. You could hear it. I meant to do a video where I showed my plan. The reason I never fixed the beet situation was I'd had this plan. And this is, I mean, the curse of having a YouTube channel is you get all these great ideas and you just don't get around to pulling them off. So I diagnosed the problem very early in the season. Oh my goodness, my beets. See, I had some beets at the other end of the garden, right? And I did get some beets out of this bed. It wasn't amazing, but it was okay, right? It wasn't a fail, actually. This was incorrect. So I have beets in my fridge. I got like a storage fridge downstairs from this bed. So I did get beets. The carrots was a fail. The beets weren't. I'm remembering things incorrectly. Anyway, what I'd planned to do, so I had beets that were growing in good soil that had a good color and had reasonable growth over here. And over here, these pathetic purple, purple beets that, when I say purple, I mean the foliage was purple. And yes, beets have a little bit of purple in their foliage, but I mean everything was purple. Right? Beet foliage, typically you've got green foliage with purple veins, right? Purple stem and a purple vein. So what I'd planned to do was do the soil test on camera, show that it was all fizzy, put some lime, right, down, right? Some, I'm not remembering my chemistry properly, but anyway, if you got acidic soil, you treat it with lime, something base, right? And that should neutralize the lime and change the way the plant is able to take up nutrients from the soil. I was going to lime it and see what happens, and then if that didn't do anything, I was going to, add some source of nitrogen to give the plants that. If the soil is too acidic, the plants can't even get nitrogen, even if it's there. It just affects the ability of the roots to take up nutrients. So I plan to do all of that and hopefully save these and do this sort of great, very sciencey, science experiment-like series of videos last summer, and I didn't do any of it. And I didn't even fix the beets off camera. I just let them continue to be pathetic and no good. Same with the squash. I should have done something with the squash, and I didn't. Anyway, for next year, this is going to be potatoes, and this is going to be something, but I'm going to put some manure down. I got a truckload of manure in the driveway late fall, and that's just waiting to be distributed throughout the beds of the garden, starting with the beds where everything didn't grow well, sort of thing, right? Identifying those as needing the most help. Okay. So I think that's about everything I wanted to touch on. That is the 2023 Garden Review. Once again, for this year, Vessi Seeds has agreed to do a coupon code with Maritime Gardening. So if you want to get free shipping on your order, your seed order, use my coupon code GAVS24. And there's details in the description box. You can't order. I think there's a surcharge on oversized items. There's more details in the description box, but as long as your order has seeds in it and everything in it isn't, the short version is as long as your order has some packs of seeds in it and there isn't anything huge in it, you won't get charged for shipping. So I hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. And until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden. Bye-bye.